Before we begin, remember this. Happiness is not something the world gives you. It is something you choose, protect, and grow within yourself. Life will not always be kind. People will not always be fair. Circumstances will not always go your way. But no matter what happens outside of you, there is one thing that always remains in your control: your response. Now, let me tell you a story. In a small, quiet village surrounded by dusty roads and modest homes, there lived an old woman. She didn't own much. Her house was simple. Her clothes were plain. Her meals were basic. But if you walked past her home early in the morning, you would hear something unusual. You would hear singing. Not the loud, showy kind, but a soft, joyful humming as she swept her compound, watered her plants, and greeted the sunrise like an old friend. People in the village often whispered about her. How can she be so happy? Doesn't she know how hard life is? Maybe she's pretending. Because you see, the old woman had faced more hardship than most. She had lost her husband many years ago. She had buried 2 children. Her remaining son had moved far away to search for work and rarely visited. She lived alone. Her roof leaked during the rainy season. Sometimes she didn't know where her next proper meal would come from, and yet she smiled every single day. One afternoon, a young man who had recently moved into the village decided he needed to understand her secret. He was educated, ambitious, and constantly stressed. He worried about money, about his career, about what people thought of him. He compared himself to everyone, and no matter what he achieved, it never felt like enough. Seeing the old woman's peace irritated him. So he walked up to her one evening as she sat outside watching the sunset. "Grandmother," he said respectfully, "may I ask you something?" She smiled warmly. "Of course, my son. How can you be happy all the time? You have so little. You've suffered so much. Don't you ever feel angry at life?" The old woman looked at him carefully. "Not with judgment, but with understanding." "Come back tomorrow morning," she said, "and bring a small bag of salt." Confused, the young man agreed. The next morning, he returned with a small sack of salt. The old woman led him to her tiny kitchen and handed him a glass of water. "Put a handful of salt into this glass," she instructed. He did. "Now stir it and drink." The young man took a sip and immediately patted out. "That's terrible," he said. "It's unbearably salty." She nodded gently. Then she led him outside the village, walking slowly until they reached a nearby lake. The water was calm and stretched wide beneath the sky. "Now," she said, "put another handful of salt into the lake." He did. "Now, drink from the lake." He bent down, scooped some water into his hands, and drank. "How does it taste?" she asked. "Fresh," he replied. "It tastes normal." The old woman sat beside him and said something he would never forget. "The pain in life is like that salt. It is always the same amount, but the bitterness you taste depends on the container you put it in." She continued, "If your heart is like a small glass, even a little sorrow will feel overwhelming. But if your heart becomes like this lake, wide, open, and deep, the same pain will not control you." The young man was silent. She wasn't finished. "You see, my son, suffering is part of being human. Losing people, failing, being misunderstood, these are not punishments. They are experiences. I cannot remove the salt from life, but I can choose to expand my heart." He looked at her simple clothes, her worn sandals, her wrinkled hands. "But how?" he asked quietly. How do you make your heart like a lake? She smiled again. I stopped asking life to be fair. He blinked. I stopped expecting people to act the way I wanted. I stopped measuring my joy by what I owned. Instead, I began to appreciate small things. The sunrise, a cool breeze, a kind word, a healthy day. She pointed to the sky. Every morning I wake up, I tell myself, today is a gift. Whatever comes, I will accept it and learn from it. When you fight reality, you suffer twice. When you accept it, you free yourself. The young man felt something shift inside him. But what about your losses? He asked gently. Your husband, your children. Her eyes softened, but they did not break. I miss them every day, she said. Love does not disappear. Grief does not vanish, but I choose to remember them with gratitude instead of bitterness. I had them once. That is a blessing. She paused. If I focus only on what I lost, my heart becomes a glass. If I focus on what I had, my heart becomes a lake. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the water. Weeks passed. The young man began practicing what the old woman taught him. When he faced a problem at work, instead of complaining endlessly, he asked himself, is my heart a glass right now or a lake? When someone criticized him, instead of reacting immediately, he breathed and expanded his perspective. When he felt anxious about the future, he focused on what he could control today. Slowly, he noticed something powerful. His problems didn't disappear, but his suffering decreased. The same salt, a bigger container. One day, he returned to the old woman's house to thank her, but when he arrived, neighbors were gathered quietly outside. The old woman had passed away peacefully in her sleep. There were no riches to distribute, no grand possessions. Only her tiny home, her garden, and the memory of her gentle smile. The village felt strangely empty without her morning songs. But something remarkable happened. The young man, once anxious and restless, began greeting people each morning with a smile. He started helping neighbors without expecting anything in return. He stopped complaining about small inconveniences, and when others asked him, "Why are you so calm these days?" he would simply say, "I met someone who taught me how to become a lake." Happiness is not about having a life without salt. It is about building a heart big enough to hold it. You will face disappointments. You will lose things. People will let you down. Plans will fail. But you have a choice. Will you be a small glass, overwhelmed by every difficulty? Or will you become a vast lake, deep, steady, and peaceful? The old woman never controlled her circumstances. She controlled her perspective, and that made all the difference. So today, whatever you are going through, expand your heart, practice gratitude, accept what you cannot change, focus on what you can. The salt will always be there, but so can your peace.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the story, please leave a comment, like, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories like this.